So Mahango's already introduced me. Hello everyone, and we're going to start straight away with the Gutenberg blocks. So this talk will mainly be about building custom Gutenberg blocks, because even though there are a lot of libraries available, but I'm talking about myself, that many times I find myself into a situation where I have a specific design which cannot be met by the libraries of blocks that are currently available, or even the core blocks, and most of the time I end up doing customization. So the knowledge of Gutenberg comes in really handy when you want to customize things. And since I personally have worked on a lot of decoupled architecture as well, so there are a lot of times I have to parse blocks, break them into pieces, and then render that on the front end. So you really have to dig deeper into Gutenberg to extract the best out of it. So we're going to talk about ways of building Gutenberg blocks. The first way is the ES5 way of building it, and the next is ESNext and JSX. So what I'm going to do is I will show you the differences between the two and let you know how building blocks with ESNext and JSX are going to be better for you, even though you can build in native JavaScript. So why write blocks in ES6 or ESNext? Let's find out. So when you use ES6, which is ECMAScript 6, you get the benefit of using arrow functions. There you have block scoping, so your variables don't leak out of their scope, they are within their scope. You have modular pattern in which you can write your blocks, which means that you can break your code into pieces, into different components, rather than having a one large file which will be difficult for you to debug. So you can go ahead and do it in a modular pattern. You can use classes and promises as well. Then if you had to write it in ES5, this is just an example. It's okay if it doesn't make sense to you right now, but just take a look at this piece of code. So on the left hand side you have the save function. It returns wp.element.createElement. So this is basically going ahead and creating a div element with certain ID and certain content. If you had to write the same thing in ESNext, then you have an option available of object destructuring, which means you can pull the createElement function out of the wp.element, and then you can actually go ahead and simplify this in a better way. So you can see that on the save, the line number where we have save, we can pull the attributes out of props, like we have pulled the createElement out of wp element. So it makes life a lot easier. It looks more cleaner as well. Okay. Alright. So now we talk about adding JSX. So what is this JSX actually? So JSX is nothing but JavaScript plus XML. Now JSX is a syntax that blends HTML and JavaScript. The advantage of using is that many of times when you were working without JSX and you had to write JavaScript along with HTML, you had to use that plus sign, and at some point it gets really messy, it becomes hard to read. So when you need to write JavaScript as well as HTML together, the best way to do that is to use JSX. So JSX provides syntactical sugar for react.createElement or wp.element.createElement in Gutenberg, which is the function that creates the HTML element. Let's take an example of this. So in the WP object, which is available globally, you have element and then you have createElement method. Like I explained, that this function can create the div element for you. So the first parameter that you passed is div. Then you pass the class name, and then whatever content, whatever text that is going to go inside of that div element, you will put that there as a third parameter. Now if you write that with JSX, see how simple that becomes, right? It looks exactly like how you would write normal HTML. The only few of the differences, like okay, so one of the differences, the key difference that you note over here, that we are not using class, we're using class name. So class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, that's why we're using class name instead. Okay, so div is basically the type of component in JSX, and the lowercase letter means that it's a built-in component, and sometimes when you're creating your own component like this one, my component, you can use capitalized letter. So this is a React component over here. So this is like a differentiator. So when you're using the lowercase letters, then it's the built-in, and anything that starts with the capital letter is actually the React component, and you can create a custom one, and they're also available in the packages as well. Alright, so now let's simplify this further down. So you can now see that I've pulled the create element out of the wp.element, and it's the same thing that I explained to you earlier, but now if I add JSX to it, see how simple it becomes. So almost like a 5-line of code becomes a 3-line of code now. It's more readable to me because now I can write HTML and JavaScript together. So you can see that inside of the development I have written the attributes.content. So I'm actually writing JavaScript, and it's going to produce the value of the attributes.content inside of that curly braces. Okay. So as you can see, it offers simplicity. So why do we write blocks in ES6 or ESNext? Well, it's easy to read and write code. It's simple. So you can write code in modular pattern. You can break your code into pieces in different components, and it prevents the need for globals. And you can also use arrow functions, which means shorter and more readable syntaxes. You can have block scopings that solves the problem of scoping ambiguity, and the promises provide you improved readability via method chaining and succinct error handling. So what are the challenges that we face when we use ES6? The first thing is that not all browsers would understand ES6, right? Can you guess which is the browser which will always be the last? Yeah, you guessed it right. It's Internet Explorer, right? So for that, we have to go ahead and do an extra build step for code transformation, which means that we have to convert the modern JavaScript into the JavaScript that most browsers can understand. And ES5 without JavaScript can run straight into the browser. However, ES6 cannot, because it's not supported by all browsers. Locating and understanding the compiled source code is difficult. So somebody who's starting new, it could be a little overwhelming for them. And tooling around JavaScript could be intimidating, because then you would need to learn WEBPACK to bundle different modules. You need to learn Babel as well. So it could be a little intimidating for you. So take a look at the browser support. Let's check arrow functions, which are part of ES6, and you can clearly see that the Internet Explorer does not support that. So what's the solution? Well, we have a package available called @WordPress There's another one which is called @WordPress create block. That is even more simpler. All you have to do is just run a bunch of commands, and it's going to automatically scaffold the entire project for you, like a plugin for you, and it's going to also create the block for you, register blocks, styles, scripts, etc. However, for this particular session, we are going to take example of WordPress scripts, because I want to show you step by step as to how these blocks are built from scratch. So let's install the WordPress scripts. So WordPress scripts is actually a collection of reusable scripts for WordPress development. What are the features that it offers? Well, it abstracts the required libraries away to standardize and simplify development. Now you'll say to me that, Imran, what is the even use of using WordPress scripts? I understand for someone probably who doesn't know Webpack and Babel, they can go ahead and use it. But I know how to set up my own stuff. So why do I have to worry about this? Well, the advantage that you are going to get with @WordPress scripts is that if there's any update that WordPress requires for its Gutenberg block development, it will automatically be updated in this package, which means you don't have to maintain those version control yourself. It will take care of it on its own, which means all you do is just update the WordPress scripts, and all of the dependencies it has for the Webpack and Babel is going to take care of it on its own. So it's one thing less to worry about. Okay, so it handles the dependency and default configuration for Webpack and Babel, because that means that when you run it, it actually sets up the Webpack, Babel, and all of the configuration that you really need for starting the Gutenberg block development, which means you can then quickly start focusing on development rather than worrying about how to set these up, or even taking time to set these up even if you knew it. There are some other benefits that come out of the box which you had to do it yourself. For example, linting tools for JavaScript and CSS like ESLint or StyleLint. So it already sets up that for you and you can use it out of the box. You also have the code testing using Jest already available at your disposal. And you can check the required license and engines as well. Alright, so let's start with the block development, which is the most interesting stuff of this talk. So I call it build blocks in 3 steps. The first one is installing this package, which is at WordPress scripts. So let's do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a directory called custom blocks. So I'm going to run this in my terminal. Then I cd into that particular directory. I say npm init es, so it's going to go ahead and create a package.json file for me with all of the default configurations. Then I do npm install -- save dev at WordPress scripts. So what this is going to do is going to install the WordPress script, and which will in turn install all of the required packages as dependency, and it's going to save this as dev dependencies because we don't need that in production. This is only for development. Then we create a directory called source, and then we create a bunch of files called index.php, index.js, editor.css, style.css, etc. So we kind of, whether you want to do it for your plugin or theme, but this time we are doing it like a theme. Sorry, the plugin. So let's take a look at the directory structure after we have run those commands. So you have node modules where it's installed all of the dependencies in the packages. You have package.lock.json, you have package.json, you have source, you have editor.css, style.css, index, index.php. Now, the entry, so what it does basically is that inside of the source directory where you have the index.js, that's where you will write all of the code for registering the block and all of the related code for building the Gutenberg blocks. So what this script is going to do is going to take that as an entry point, and you can include multiple modules into it, multiple components. You can just import them, and finally it's going to bundle it and produces as an output inside of the build directory and the same name, which is index.js. And all you have to do is just enqueue that file, and automatically your JavaScript will be available in your plugin ready to use. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So inside of your package.json, it doesn't work automatically. You just need to add some of the script commands so that you can run it. So the first script command you will write as build, wp scripts build. You can name the build keyword to something else as well. It's completely up to you. Some people write it prod, so it's totally up to you. Then you have start. Again, some people like to write it as dev. You can choose start or dev. It's up to you. You can even write your own name. It doesn't matter. It's just a custom script. What is important is that on the right hand side you should put wp-scripts start. Okay. So now when you run this command, npm run start is going to start a development server, and as you can see that it is actually taking that index.js as an entry point and outputting it all of the bundled file inside of the build index.js, and Webpack is watching this file, which means that if you make any changes in your code, you don't really have to worry about anything because it's constantly watching and doing the bundling and stuff. Okay. Alright, so after you run that command, see how the build structure changes. So now you can see the green one, so that is the one that's been outputted, and the source for that is the red file, which is index.js. So that is the entry point where it's taking the code from. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is register the block client side. So first thing we did was install that package. Second is register the block client side. All right. So inside of the WP object, you have internationalization available, which you can use for internationalization, and we are pulling the double underscore from that. And then we pull the register block type function from wp.blocks, and then we register the block type. You can also import it as well from the WordPress at WordPress/i18n package as well, which I will show you in a moment. So there are both the ways that are available. So you call this function register block type, and this over here that you see, this is the block name, all right, and this is the key value pair. So this is the block configuration objects on the right hand side, the second parameter that you see. So another way of doing it is import this from WordPress internationalization, like I explained to you earlier. Import the register block type function, and you can pass a title, so whatever the title of your block will be. So if somebody searches it in the editor, what is the name that is going to appear? You can put an icon for it. You can you can actually use all of the dash icons that are available. You can also add your custom icon. You can choose the categories, so you can not only add your custom blocks in the existing Gutenberg block core categories, but also register your own categories and add them. For now, let's just do it in common, which is the default core block category. Okay, then there are two functions. First is the edit. So this function basically is responsible for whatever happens in the editor, and then you have the save function. So this is responsible for what goes into the database under that post. So edit needs to return the content. Whatever content it's going to return, it's going to show that in the editor, and whatever save is going to return is going to be saved into the database. Okay, so this describes the structure of the block, represents what editor will render when the block is used on the editor. Save method, like I explained to you, decides how your content would look like on the front end, because it's saved into the database, and from there it's actually rendered onto the front end. It defines how the attribute will combine together to generate a final markup, and markup then serialized and saved into the database. Okay, so let's run the npm run start again, and now you can see that something interesting over here. There is actually one new file, if you notice. The first file that says index.asset.php. Now what is this? I didn't see that file before. How is it outputting a PHP file and it's dealing with JavaScript? Let's find out. Okay, so directory structure changed a little bit this time since we added our custom block. So now we have something called index.assets.php. So what's the use of that? Let's find out. So you can see that inside of this PHP file, it returns an array of dependency and the version number. So what is this dependency? WP block editor, WP block, WP element, what is all of that? And if you go back a few steps earlier, and if you recall, we imported the at WordPress WP internationalization, right? And we also imported the WP at WordPress blocks and at WordPress block editor. So what happens is that when you are actually wanting to enqueue this JavaScript, you need to provide the dependencies. Okay, so what are the dependencies it has? Now, all these files, I have been managing the dependencies myself, but thanks to the package at WordPress scripts, it generates the dependencies based on what you actually import. So if you import only two things, it's going to output that as dependency only those two ones. But if you import more, it's going to keep adding that. So now I don't really have to maintain it myself. That's another advantage of this. So first was I don't have to worry about managing the version number of the packages and dependencies, and now there's another benefit, which is I have my dependency array ready to use, and I know it's going to automatically change as in I add more blocks and I import more of the packages. One more thing we have over here is the version, and this is going to also change dynamically based on what you're developing. So now when you do enqueue style or enqueue script, for that matter, then you can use this version over there so that you always get the fresh file included. Okay, so now let's talk about registering the scripts and styles. So how do you do that? So in order for us to do that, we have a hook available called enqueue block assets. Now there are two types of hooks in WordPress for this. One is the enqueue block assets, which basically ensures that whenever you are enqueuing the styles and script inside of this custom function, then it's going to include that both in editor as well as in the front end. However, there will be times when you just want it in the editor, you don't want it in the front end. So in that case, you can use another hook, which is enqueue block editor assets. So if you use that hook, it's only going to include in the editor and not in the front end. I generally use that for when I'm building decoupled application, because I know I'm not going to have any front-end theme in WordPress side of things. I'll probably have React. So at that time, I don't really need to include the styles on the front end. I can just use it for the block editor for editors. Okay, but in our case, we need this, so let's go with that. And you also have an option to optionally check using isAdmin, like include these styles and script conditionally as well. Okay, so that's our custom function, which is hooked onto that hook. And inside of this custom function, what we do basically is we get hold of that asset config file, which I just shown to you, index.asset.php. We require it, and then we use enqueue script. We pass the GCDB block.js. You can choose a different name as well as a hook name. And then you give the path to your index.js, which is the build path, so build/index.js. And then you pass the dependencies. So remember, I showed to you that you can actually use this dependencies dynamically, and similarly the version as well. And then finally, that you want where you want to include it. Awesome. So that's how you enqueue the script. And for registering styles, again, you use the WP register style function inside of the same custom function. And then you give the path to the style. You give the dependencies, because we don't really get the CSS dependencies in that assets.php, so we have to define it here. And then you can also give it the file m times so that we get the latest updated editor.css styles. Okay, at this point you can include the style.css depending on where you want it actually. Like I said, you can use it conditionally also, but if you want it at both places, front end and back end, you can keep it in one file itself. It totally depends on your requirement. Alright, so what is this WP blocks? Well, WP blocks includes the block type registration and related functions. WP element includes the WordPress element abstraction for describing the structure of your blocks. And WP block editor dependency that we spoke about includes the components like RichText, media upload, and many more. Alright, let's take a look. When you do WP components, or let's do WP block editor, because it's available in the WP object, you can check this in the editor console and you can see these are all of the methods that are available that you can use, all of the components that are available that you can use. So that's what's there inside of the WP block editor. If you check wp.components, you can print out and see. So sometimes this could be a good place to check if you're wanting to know which package includes what. Alright, so now if you go and add that block, custom block, there you go, you can see the hello world is being displayed. Publish it, that's it. We go into the front end and we see our block. Congratulations, we have just built our first block so quickly. Alright, let's continue. So now things are gonna get a little interesting, because you'll say to me, Imran, I already know it. I know how to build that basic block. What are you telling me different, right? I want to know more. I want to know deep knowledge, how these things are working under the hood. What is this edit method? How this save works? Let's dig deeper. Okay, so we're going to talk about state of a block. So state is a plain JavaScript object, Many of you who have worked with React already know what state is, but even if you don't, it's fine. We'll discuss this. So a state of a block is maintained through the editing session. So to achieve dynamic change in the block structure, when the user changes a block or types something, we manage state in Gutenberg, right? So every time a block is updated, the edit function is called, which means if the user types anything, he interacts with it, edit function gets called. So many of you who have worked with React would already know about the render function, right? So think of this edit method as your render function, which gets called each time the state changes. Now, where is it saved into the database? Where is this post saved into the database, and how does it look like compared to what we used to have when we didn't have Gutenberg? So as you can see over here, this is how it looks like, right? So this part that you see is interesting. This is the block name. Remember, this is the block name we gave when we were calling that register block type function to register our block, right? So that's the block name. It's being shown in the comment delimiter. So what you see over here is called comment delimiter. Okay, so we discussed about this block name as to how this content looked like into the database. And now we're going to move on to the attributes, which is one of the key things when you are building Gutenberg blocks. So what are these attributes? So attributes help you extract block attribute values from the save post content, and they map from the save markup to a JavaScript representation of blocks. Attribute sources are superset functionalities provided by HPQ. So it will be interesting for you to know that WordPress Gutenberg is actually using an HPQ library for this. So what is this HPQ? HPQ is a small library used to parse and query HTML markup into an object shape, and that's what it's using behind the scenes. So when you define these attributes into register block type function, it is passed to the edit and the save method. So the attributes are available both in edit as well as on the save. So you can use it to your benefit in the attributes in the edit method, and whenever you're saving the content, when the user types something, you can dynamically then use that value and save into the database. Okay, so how do we define these attributes? So you are pretty familiar now with the register block type function, so let's continue with that. You can add attributes as an object, and then in key value pair you can add different things. For example, if I want to add a key called full name, I can add that. I can define what type of it will be. Will it be an array? So in this case, an array. What will it be? What will be the source? So it's going to target the children. Selector, which is going to get hold of the P element, and if you take a look, this looks for the text inside of the selector. Okay, so if the selector is P tag, it's going to look for anything inside of that P tag, whatever text, whatever content is inside of the P tag. Okay, so attributes, like I said, are then passed to the edit and the save method. So if you take a look at the edit method and you console the props to see what you get. So it's going to print out the attributes, the full name, which is currently an array, there's nothing inside of it, and then you have the class name by default, and you can see that WordPress is using the block name that you provided at the time of registering the block as class name by prefixing it with wp-block. Then the name of the block which you registered, and then it also has a method called setAttributes. Now what is this setAttribute? So for all of you who have worked with React, you know you have setState method, right? So you can think of setAttributes as setState. So if you know React, in React, whenever you call setState, the render method is called, right? In the same way, whenever you use setAttributes to go ahead and update the state, the edit function is called. So it's the same concept. All right, now there are some reusable components that we can use, and instead of creating DOM nodes using create element, we can encapsulate this behavior using components. So we can, using components, we can hide the complexity into self-contained units, and many blocks share the same complex behavior. Reusable components simplify implementation of the blocks edit function. For example, rich text, block controls, alignment toolbar, these are all of the core Gutenberg block components. You can create your own custom ones as well. So let's take an example of the rich text. Alright, so it's available inside of the package, which is at WordPress block editor. If you're using the WP object, then it'll be inside of the WP dot block editor. And then you use the register block type function to register our block. We go ahead and use it inside of the edit function. So we had gone ahead and added the attributes, which is full name. We know that we can pull the set attributes and class name, like I explained to you when we did the console. These are the keys that are available inside of props, so we can use. And then we return the rich text component, which is the WordPress Gutenberg block component, and it's going to ask for different values, so we can pass in key value pairs. It's going to ask for different props, so we can pass the tag name props as div. You can choose a different one if you want. We can put the placeholder, the value. Notice that we are using the double underscore function for internationalization, for translation, and we are also passing our text domain as custom blocks there. Then the value, we are using a variable here. We are not hard coding it because we want the user to enter their name, and then this value should get updated dynamically. Okay, then we put an onChange event. So anytime the user is typing anything inside of this element, then a set attributes function is called, which is as good as set state. And every time this is called, the render method is going to be called again. So let's say he types A, edit function gets called. He types I, edit function gets called, and then the value will keep getting updated. So initially will be, for example, it's my name, then it will be IMRAN, and it's going to continue updating it. And because we're using the dynamic value full name, it's going to utilize that. Okay, and then we are using this class name props, and that's it in the edit. Let's go to the save function. Again, like I explained to you earlier, that the attributes, your props, are available both in edit and save. So when after user has entered the entire name, we get the same value in form of attributes in the full name, and then we can then use it dynamically to return it inside of the rich text dot content, and then we can put that as a value, which then gets saved into the database. Alright, so let's take a look. This is how it looks like if we put everything together. I don't know if it's pretty small for you to see, but this is how it looks like. Alright. Alright, let's see this in action now. Since we are done with the coding, let's go to the editor and see this in action. So user enters the data. You can see that if I type my name, you can see that it's constantly updating, which means that the set attributes function is being called, and it's taking the fresh value and it's updating our state with it. Okay, and then when the user clicks on save, so he clicks on publish, so save gets called, and now that data is available inside of the attributes under the save method, and then we can then save that data into the database. Alright, so that's about it. So there are more ways of building block, like I explained to you earlier. You can use the @WordPress create block as well, which kind of creates the boilerplate for you. It creates a plugin in the block as well for you. There are some third-party libraries that you can use. You have editor blocks, you have Gutenberg Hub, you have Gutenberg Cloud that you can use. There are WordPress Core available, because there are a lot of times you'll find that the documentation is not available on the WordPress org, and at that time you'll find yourself hunting the information inside of the WordPress core. So it's important you take a look at it. I have kind of bookmarked it for myself, so when I need it, I can just go and check it out. So these are some of the links for that. So for example, the register block type function resides in this URL on WordPress core. The components core files are here. Okay, I just wanted to show you. Okay, So if you want to, if you are a beginner or intermediate, etc., you can, and if you want to learn programming, there are a couple of ways you can do it. So we have learn.articam.com, where if you want to learn WordPress is dedicated to that, and you can go ahead and learn WordPress here. You can also apply for a job. And if you're looking for more stuff, for example, if you're looking for learning Babel, Gatsby, Laravel, PWA, Redux, Webpack, all of these courses are available here at Codeytek.com. It's an open source platform, so you can check it out. We're all done, and I'm happy to take any questions. Please follow me at GitHub at imranhsayed.